And look, I did say at the start, no, I'm not a mythicist. Maybe I am. Once again, it depends on where you draw that line of what is and what isn't a mythicist.
Well, someone who's definitely not a mythicist, by the way, is James is Tired. He's actually a Christian, and he just popped in here to offer his perspective. He's been active in the comments as you were talking, and I'm sure he has a couple of things to say, but I just wanted to introduce him since he came on.
What's up, James?
Hey, how's it going, guys? So lots and lots to respond to, and very, very little time to do so. I guess I'll hit one or two and then throw out a thought about the mythicist movement. And this one I can't really speak too much on, but it's called the Armenian letters, which are from Egypt, and they actually have a lot of scholars saying, hey, it's very probable that this is the information about the Exodus. So somebody research that, and I would love to talk with somebody further, but we may have found historical documentation from the Egyptian side. So, and it's spelled AMARNA letters. And I would love to talk with somebody about that further, but I don't have much on it, so I don't want to speak too much on it.
How recent is that, James?
I just found out about it within the past week, so I can't speak much on it, but the person who is presenting it to me,
I'm very careful with it. I'm very careful with a lot of that stuff, and look, I remember back in my Christian days, there was a lot of this history that was put out there, and I'll use that in inverted commas, that wasn't particularly good and was sort of designed to speak to an audience. I remember seeing Sargon. They said, Sargon's mentioned in the Old Testament, and then we found him years later, and we found the ruins of Akkad years later, and that's evidence that the Bible is correct to this point. Except the problem is it was talking about two different people. One who historically existed back around 500 BC, and the other one who was 2200 BC, which 1700 year gap. Things like Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, the location of Mount Sinai being in Saudi Arabia and guarded, and things like that. I think you've got to be very careful with a lot of the, and I say this without having seen these Armenian letters that you're speaking about, but you do have to be very, very.
Tablets, and the only thing I would say, just in a short rebuttal, because I don't think either of us can really talk about them at the moment, is that until we dig into it more, I'm not trying to overplay my hand, nor did I when I came on, and that's why I threw out the information. But I also don't think we should underplay their value, because that I find is a problem when I do talk to mythicists in particular. For example, we'll run into where they'll assume that the correlation implies causation, but when you look at the majority of scholars of antiquity, the parallels aren't so parallel. And if you go through like examples of dying and rising gods, other correlations that people make, you realize that there's not a direct causation. There, in some cases, they're separated by hundreds of years and thousands of miles.
When you say a direct causation, are you saying that because there are similar stories, but one story did not cause or influence a future story? Is that what you mean by causation?
Yes.
Okay.
Literally, you can't get, like, when you're looking at historian and antiquity, you can't just say because this event looks similar to this event, and this event came before, that automatically this event must have inspired the other one. Like when I talked to Dr. Josh, who's also not a mythicist, he would agree with me that the majority of scholarship and the consensus is that historical Jesus did exist. So it's not like I have a minority position within this.
I do take issue with that. And look, I'm someone who's been arguing the other side, incidentally. The majority of Jesus scholarship is Christian. So they're beginning from that position. Biblical scholarship is the same. If you look at actually historians who are secular, it's actually a lot more evenly split than you'd think. And certainly I think that grey area does come into it a lot with, a lot of people who aren't really sort of prepared to take a strong stance either way. The letters you're talking about, I had Armenian letters. You're not talking about the Amana letters, are you?
I may have pronounced them wrong, but I can shoot you an
Amarna.
Yeah, he spelled it. It's the Amarna letters. Those are it's this huge collection of tablets from Egypt. They date back to like the 14th century. At one point, they mentioned a group of people called the Habiru, which some people have said could possibly be a reference to the Hebrews. Now, there are a couple of problems with that. It seems to be talking about almost like a group of refugees, not about an ethnic group. And it may actually be almost like like a slur that they're using. There's a lot of debate going on right now concerning the word Habiru, what it means, how it's used, who it refers to. But it's talking about a group of people, because a lot of these letters in the Amarna letters, they're correspondence between the Egyptians and a bunch of these different provinces that they ruled over, such as Canaan. And there's letters going back and forth between these different groups further to the east around Palestine and Egypt. And they're talking about a group of people over there. So even if this is about, the Hebrews, they're not talking about them being like captives in Egypt. They're talking about a group of people that's over in Palestine. There's actually a lady, she's an Egyptologist. I think her name is Kara Clooney, I believe. I could be getting the name wrong. She's been on Digital Hammurabi before, but she is an Egyptologist, and she actually talks about this, about the Amarna letters, about the Habiru, about the idea of the Exodus, of Jews being in Egypt, like 1000 BC and earlier and things like that. You can find her interview on Digital Hammurabi's channel. I think it's about an hour and a half long or so. And it's good information coming from an actual Egyptologist. The
Amarna letters, by the way, were discovered in around 1887, according to Wikipedia. I didn't dig into that too deep, but just to give some perspective that that's over 100 years old. So it would seem to me that the historians or that the people who are doubting the Exodus story would have had much time to take that into consideration before expressing their doubt.
It really depends, because I have to study more before I dismiss your point, Bryce. But
I'm not making a point. I'm not saying that it is or that it isn't. I just wanted to give some clarity to when the Amarna letters, how long we've had access to that before we've decided.
I would say this in the defense of, there are a lot of them that are still being translated. So it's an ongoing scholarly process. I think with the Habiru, I think there was a few similar words, and my understanding of it was almost like a people north, people east, people west sort of scenario, or people south, in describing where they were from. And look, there's no doubt that there were people in that region at the time. We know that. But I think it's so, and this went back when I was the Christian pastor rather than the atheist pastor. It was one thing that used to bother me was some of the, I guess, bad arguments that were being made for Christianity, and a lot of that came from, I guess you had your Hovens of the world, but also bad history or misinterpretation of history that, when you look into it, and without sort of going too deep into it, could be sort of scratched off pretty quick. Things like, the Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, for instance, things like that. So I would say be careful with that. I think that there are reasonable arguments for the existence of a Jesus character, I guess, to get back to the initial point. I don't believe it's conclusive, but nor would I expect it to be conclusive based on the era that it was written in. So, or the era that it would have existed.
To not take more time than was offered, because I don't want to impose on my host, there was a comment about the majority of historians being Christian. So typically when I talk to mythicists, I try to not use Christian sources.
The majority of biblical scholars and the majority of historians who look at those biblical times are absolutely in the
But he's saying that he doesn't.
I try not to use them. I would use, for example, if I was talking to a mythicist right now, which I believe there's only one on the video now, I would simply use Bart.
I could swing either way.
Because I think Bart Ehrman is probably one of the most credible people on that. And just to share a quote of his and then get your guys' response, and then I can take off. It says, Jesus existed, and those vocal persons who deny it so, not because they consider the evidence with the dispassionate eye of an historian, but because they have some other agenda that denies services. So what are your guys' thoughts on that accusation that you are not being actually critical?
I think we kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, but I'll let you guys respond because you were talking about your misgivings about Bart Ehrman in terms of his book, anyway. So I'll let you guys.
I think that's the entirety of history. It's one thing I've learned being a historian is if you can find two historians who agree on everything, I'll give you $1 million because it's history is all about. The arguments and the debates that happen within history and the way certain things are interpreted, because there's so much to look at and none of us can know or look at everything. There's definitely arguments. One thing I do want to say about Bart Ehrman's book, I think it probably got a little bit of a harsh treatment. I wouldn't look at Bart Ehrman's this particular book as an academic or scholarly book, and that's not the intended audience. The intended audience is a more general audience, and it's certainly you've got to put commercial into that. I mean, look, I've got some great books on my shelf that are fantastic scholarly historical books, but I can tell you the one written by the local journalist that has a little bit of this and that and some tales thrown in will always outsell it by about 1,000 to 1, because the scholarly market from a commercial point of view is very small. It's for people who happen to be studying that particular topic. And even then, because everything's accessible online now through EBSCO, it's...
If I'm interpreting you correctly, it sounds like you're suggesting that Bart Ehrman actually could have substantial evidence, scientific, historical, whatever, backing up his position that he just simply may not have included in the book.
Because it wasn't the audience. It wasn't the audience for it. So I think you always it's and there's plenty of examples across probably everything. It's if Richard Dawkins he's written books that I've got on my 10-year-old daughter's shelf because that's a book that's directed at her. Now, is that a fantastic scholarly source? No, but can he write a fantastic scholarly book on the issues he discusses in that book? Absolutely.